Every new day brings a quiet promise of hope rising in the sky. In today's tutorial, I'll guide you step by step through an atmospheric landscape where light and air shape both the mood and the beauty of the scene. So grab your brushes and let's get started. Let's begin by drawing our windmill. I'm using the roll of thirds here, placing the horizon on the lower third of the paper. I'm also making a light vertical guide. This helps me place the windmill exactly where I want it, keeping the composition balanced. Then I begin sketching the silhouette. This is how I usually draw. I mark where the lines start and end first, and only then connect them. At this stage, I'm not worried about details. I'm just looking for simple proportions and the overall shape, because this will be a silhouette. I chose a windmill not only because I love them, but also because it's a very strong, recognizable shape. Even without details, you can immediately tell what it is. Sometimes drawing can feel difficult, but once you get used to breaking shapes into smaller ones, it becomes much easier. You're just focusing on one simple shape at a time. Now that I've finished the outlines, I'll use an eraser to soften the pencil marks so they won't show through the watercolor later. I'm using a little box to tilt the paper just a bit. Feel free to use anything you have, a book, a case, anything works. This slight incline gives you better control over the water flow during the first wash. Now we're preparing a variegated wash. For this, I need a very fluid mixture so the paint can run smoothly over the dry paper. But it also needs enough pigment. If the mix is too diluted, the sky will look pale. So I'm aiming for that perfect balance, watery enough to flow but still full of color. I'm starting the wash with a flat brush, always creating a little bead of paint at the edge. This bead gives us some extra working time and helps the color glide smoothly as we move downward. I'm adding golden dip and gently pulling the wash downward, always keeping that little bead of paint moving with me. This helps the colors blend softly into each other, creating that smooth, glowing transition of a sunrise. As I go down, I add more and more golden dip, always keeping that mixture very fluid. Near the horizon line, I add a thicker mix of Naples yellow. This adds warmth and makes the glow of the sunrise more intense right where the light would naturally be strongest. And from here, I simply carry the wash all the way down, diluting the color with clean water. This creates a soft fade and keeps the base of the scene light and airy, perfect for the landscape we will add later. At the two bottom corners, I'm adding a touch of permanent rose. This creates a soft, enchanting frame around the scene and brings a gentle warmth back into the composition. And that completes our first layer. This soft wash will connect all the elements later and set the overall mood of our sunrise scene. Now that the paper is completely dry, I'll add it again so we can create soft clouds with smooth edges. I'm preparing a richer mixture using blue-gray, permanent rose, and just a touch of permanent red light. Together, they create a grayish lavender tone, perfect for soft morning clouds. I'm applying the color with light, diagonal brush strokes, all gently pointing toward the windmill. This creates a sense of movement in the sky. As I get closer to the windmill, the strokes become smaller and shorter. This helps create depth and guides the eye into the scene. Now I'm mixing several values using burnt sienna and ultramarine. With these two colors, I can create a whole range of warm and cool browns to paint the silhouette of the windmill. It's important to keep this mix well diluted so it stays transparent. That transparency is what preserves the atmospheric feeling of dawn and allows the soft background glow to shine through. I carefully paint the closest blade of the windmill using a slightly darker tone. This helps bring it forward and immediately adds a sense of depth to the structure. As I paint the blades that are farther away, the colors become lighter, more diluted, and closer to the tones of the sky. This creates a beautiful sense of depth and makes the windmill feel naturally integrated into the atmosphere. For the furnace blade, I add a touch of golden dip to the mix so it matches the color of the sky. Now we'll paint the windmill using atmospheric effects. Even though it's just a silhouette, we can still bring in that soft morning magic. So I'm whitening the inside of the windmill first. This will help us create gentle transitions and a glow that feels natural to the dawn. I'm painting the first layer of the windmill with a golden tone. I'm using golden dip. I leave the right side lighter because that's the side that's farther away and catching more of the morning light. While the paint is still wet, I add the burnt sienna and ultramarine mix on the left side, where the windmill is backlit. This creates a soft transition and gently shapes the form without harsh edges. I keep the right side lighter and more golden by creating the soft gradient with a small brush. I complete the windmill by extending this gradient downward, keeping the lower edges very soft. This will allow us to connect it to the field later in a subtle, natural way. And now I finish by painting the small structural supports of the windmill. They are delicate details, but they help complete the silhouette and make the shape feel more authentic. Once the windmill is completely dry, I'll carefully wet it again to add another layer on the bottom half, because I feel it needs a bit more contrast. Now I'll wet the bottom half of the paper, carefully avoiding the windmill, so we can start working on the grass area. Now I'm warming up my olive green with just a touch of permanent rose. This tiny bit of pink helps connect the foreground with the colors in the sky. I start painting from the lower corners, keeping the edges soft, almost like little patches of foggy morning grass. I keep building the landscape with very soft tapping motions, almost like I'm whispering the shapes onto the paper. These gentle strokes help me suggest little patches of grass while leaving paths of morning mist weaving through the field. Now I start building the field little by little, deepening the color only where there is already pigment. This gradual layering gives the grass more body and volume, while the lighter untouched spaces naturally become pockets of morning mist. Now I'll repeat the process to add another layer to the grass and create more depth. Always apply slightly thicker paint on top of the layer underneath. And if it's almost dry, let it dry completely before adding another layer to avoid blooms. Now that we've established the structure of the grass, we get to my favorite part, adding texture. I start by sprinkling clean water with a small brush. These tiny droplets bloom softly into the pigment, creating natural highlights and bringing the field to life. And I sprinkle a little table salt just over the lower corners. And now, with a fine brush, I gently lift some of the paint to suggest little blades of grass catching the light. It's a simple detail, but it makes the landscape breathe, almost as if the morning light is softly resting on the field. Now that the paper is dry, we can see the salt effect. But I feel the horizon line and the grass area need a bit more definition. So I'll mix a bit more olive green, golden deep, and permanent rose. I'll wet the paper once more. Now, I'll deepen some areas, always preserving the path of the morning mist. Don't worry too much about making adjustments, especially when it comes to contrast. Watercolor always dries lighter, so adjusting values and contrast is simply part of the process. By the way, it's always better to build up layers gently than go in with dark colors right away, because that's very hard to undo. And now, on damp paper, I drop in a few darker tones right next to the lighter spots created by the salt. These tiny contrasts suggest little shadows in the field and bring the whole foreground to life. And to finish, I add a few soft rosy splatters along the bottom. This muted shade of pink brings a gentle sparkle of color without breaking the harmony of the scene. And we're done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe for more cozy painting sessions. Now let's head over to the Cozy Community Gallery. This month we have some beautiful artworks from the Cozy Winter tutorial. I love how each artist added their own personal touch. Every piece feels so unique. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. If you try one of my demos or tutorials and share it on Instagram, feel free to tag me at re.cozy.art. You might be featured in the next Community Gallery. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.